from your presence. Red flag laws, safe to tell laws, they provide a mechanism to do that. Every state needs to have some similar type law. We need to have some similar type law on the federal level. We need to be able to have our organizations communicate with each other. Law enforcement, mental health, they need to be able to talk to one another so that way they can tell who is a danger to themselves or a danger to others and have those weapons removed. Now, the good thing about red flags law, it allows you to go to court and say, hey, I've gotten better, I've gotten the treatment, I'm no longer in danger to myself, so you can get your weapons back. But at any point that you propose to be a danger to someone else, you need to have your weapons removed. That's the only thing that can keep you from harming others. And that's why it needs to be in place all over the country, not just in certain states.
All right, so we're up to about 6:50 here. We're probably, hopefully the call will be cutting in here shortly. Thanks for those calls. Got one or two technical issues we're working on here as well, but we should still be live. Just double checking a few things here. Thanks for going through those questions. The rapid fire.
Yeah.
Good.
Are we still live?
Yep.
I'm hoping Mr. Loudermilk will cover some of the things, or some people will ask questions. One is about the Farm Bill, which he voted no on. The Farm Bill provided mental health treatment for our farmers. Many people don't know this, but our farmers literally have not had a pay raise since 2013. They're still making the same wages as they made in 2013, whereas we can see costs have gone up quite a bit since then. And we have a crisis in our farmers committing suicide at a rate that is probably 5 times that of the general public. And it's because they're not being able to get the mental health that they need. And the Farm Bill that was passed, or that was proposed, provided for that, was voted against by Mr. Loudermilk. Also, hopefully they'll ask him about the current opiate addiction bill that he voted no on. It still has to go to the Senate, but it's critical that we need to know why he voted no on that bill. Is there something that we don't know about that gave him a reason to vote no on that bill? Also, the immigration bill, which just failed to pass, because at that time, the immigration bill did not have any promises for the DACA individuals. Why did it not have any promises for the DACA individuals? Why, if we're going to stick to our word, if we're going to stick to who we are as a nation, did he vote no? Did he vote yes for that bill? And it did not pass. Also, we need to know his answers to the ACA. How are you going to fix it? What proposed legislation are you going to fix? And lastly, on the immigration bill, he posted probably 3 or 4 days ago that he first found out a problem about separating families 3 years ago. If that was the case, why wasn't that brought to the fore then? Why wasn't something put in place at that time to make sure that those things didn't happen? These are simple questions that we need to ask our congressmen. When you notice a problem, why aren't you proposing legislation? I could understand something might not pass, but if you see it, propose the legislation. Stop sitting on your behind and allow somebody else to do it when you can move forward with it. And also, we keep hearing the issues about Social Security. We keep hearing that by 2034, 2036, that Social Security is going to be forced to roll back benefits. We have to understand that the baby boomers are an aging population, probably the biggest population that we have in the United States right now. They are going to need their benefits that they've paid for throughout their entire life. And if we're considering rolling back 25% of the benefits, we're going to put these people in a world of hurt, because we as a nation already know that most people aren't prepared for retirement. They have not saved enough money. They don't have enough money in their 401ks. They do not have retirement benefits. Social Security is not going to be enough to sustain them. Well, if we know that's the position of the majority of Americans, how are we going to cut their benefits by 25%? The housing crisis right now, we've got a shortage of houses, and what has that done? It's raised the price of everything that everybody is attempting to buy. Just in some neighborhoods here in local Marietta, we've seen signs go from $200,000 to $400,000 in less than two months 2 or 6 months. Why? Because it's a seller's market right now because there's such a shortage of houses. And it's just going to get worse as interest rates continue to rise, house prices continue to go up. We're going to make it a situation where nobody can live the American dream, can buy a home. Well, what's going to happen when they get on fixed incomes? What are we going to do to make sure these things don't happen for our aging population? There's a lot of things going on in America, a lot of things. And we need to make sure that we have people in place who are noticing those things, reacting to those things, and making sure that they're taking care of what we need to be taken care of. Because if we don't do that, we're going to continue to see a downgrade or difference between the haves and the have-nots. And if you want to talk about revolution, you want to talk about civil wars, you want to talk about violence, continue to make that happen. Continue to make there be a big difference between the haves and have-nots. And we're going to see things get a lot worse. We need to make sure that everybody has the opportunities, the equality, the true meaning of being an American, being able to seek those inalienable rights, continuing to seek pursuit of happiness, making sure that they do the things that they need to do.
Telephone town hall. In just a moment, I will turn the floor over to Congressman Loudermilk to make an opening statement.
Looks like we're about to get started.
We will go straight to your questions. If you would like to ask a question, please press *3 to enter the queue. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *3 to enter the queue. And now, here's Congressman Loudermilk.
I want to thank everybody for taking a few minutes out of your day, especially the evening, to attend this telephone town hall. You know, it's been really, really busy, especially up here in Washington, D.C. for this entire year with so much going on. And we just want to take some time to kind of give you an update about what's happening, what's coming in the future. But more importantly, answer the questions that you have, because unfortunately right now, the truth about what's going on doesn't seem to be making it out. And when I'm back home in the district and I'm out and about, I see many of you out in the community, and we talk about the things that are happening. More often than not, I hear, I'm not hearing about what's going on. Why am I just now hearing about this? So we want to make sure that we are staying in communications about what's going on, but also getting your feedback and answering your questions. You know, right now we're seeing an unbelievable growth in our economy. We're seeing things turn around better than most people even expected. I remember just a couple of years ago when the Congressional Budget Office came out with a report that stated that the best that we could expect in our economic growth from now on would be 1% to 2%. And we have far exceeded that, especially since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has gone into effect. We have just seen an unprecedented and unbelievable growth. Not only have we surpassed the 1% to 2% GDP, I was meeting with the Treasury Secretary earlier this week, and he told me they're estimating that the quarterly growth for this quarter will be about 4.7%. New statistics just came out yesterday. CNBC released a poll, which surprised a lot of them and didn't surprise me so much. But in the 10 years that they've been doing this survey, this is recorded that 54% of the American people say the economy is good or excellent. People are beginning to feel the change that's going on in America's economy. And that's very positive for everyone, from the business owners to the employees, for the retirement plans, for paychecks. The statistics just keep going in the right direction. Another part of the CNBC poll was that 51% of Americans approve of the president's handling of the economy, and I think that's evident with all that we're seeing. We've got something that a lot of people didn't realize as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was we allowed for U.S. companies to bring back to the U.S. some of the the assets that they had, the cash that they had kept overseas because of the high taxation that we would have placed on that money to come back to the U.S. So it's held out of our economy. Occasionally, businesses would bring back some of this money. To give you an idea, is that in the year before last, only $38 billion was repatriated back in the United States. But this year, over $300 billion was repatriated. Was brought back to the U.S. $300 billion was brought back right after we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and so that's money going into our economy. That we're even seeing the government revenues increase. We're even to start to see more come in to close that deficit gap that was created when we did cut the revenues for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Is beginning to grow and close that gap. And in the end, it will pay for itself, and that's the investment that we were making. Unemployment is down to 3.8%, and we've added just, almost 250,000 jobs just in May. We've added over 1 million jobs in the last year. In fact, our jobs are exceeding the number of employees that we have to fulfill jobs. New York Times is reporting that the jobless rates for Hispanics, teenagers, and those with less than high school education are at near multi-decade lows. And of course, everyone's heard that African American unemployment is at an all-time low of 5.9%. And it's Main Street that is growing the most out of this. For 45 years, we've been tracking what the confidence level of small business, because small business is the backbone of America. America is fueled by Main Street, not Wall Street. And so a lot of what we've been focusing on is on those small businesses, those mom and pops, those startup companies, those that many have been in business for many years, but they hire the grassroots of America. And for 45 years, we've been tracking small business optimism. And this year, it hit the highest that it's ever been recorded in small business optimism, which means they're willing to invest more into their employees, they're willing to invest more into their businesses. And so we're seeing this business growth exceed anything that we ever expected. And employees are beginning to see this too, because we're seeing that that paychecks are growing as well, because businesses are actually rewarding those employees now that they can afford to give pay increases. We've seen over 4 million American workers have received houses, and over 87 million people have seen lower utility bills because of this. And it's a residual effect. In fact, in the state of Georgia, when I was meeting with Governor Deal back a few months ago, just before they passed the largest income tax cut in Georgia since the 1930s, I was meeting with him, and he said, "Look, we would have not been able to do this had not Congress passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act." So we're seeing the results of allowing the American people to keep more of their own money so they can invest it in what's important to you, not just what the government determines we should invest it in. And so we're seeing this thing turn around. People are generally more happy. I'm seeing that. In fact, polls are showing that the American people are more confident. They're happier about their own financial situation and their own futures than we've seen in decades. So some of the things that are going on here in Washington in the next few weeks, we've got this week, in fact, we're debating right now on the House floor while I'm talking to you, is our defense appropriations bill. This is going to be in line with what the president's priorities have been, which is rebuilding our military. Our military was drastically cut. One of the problems we had with our military is over the previous couple of years, we had more deaths and injuries due to training incidents and accidents, literally of our equipment failing our soldiers, our sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen. More training fatalities than we actually lost in combat. And that is not what we should see in this nation. We should ensure that those who go to defend our freedom and defend our nation are given the absolute best that's available. And we have evidence and stories of scavenging decades-old airplanes just to get parts. My son, who was in the Army, the airborne troop, pulled out of the field their training because they ran out of ammunition and they didn't have enough ammunition to continue their training. These are the types of things we've been working to turn around. And so we're funding new hardware. We're funding improving the hardware that we already have, putting more hardware and weapon systems into the hands of the war fighters. But we're also increasing the training, adding $9.3 billion into training. So we know that when our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines go into combat, they have received the absolute best training. So they are the absolute best in the entire world. And we're going to give them the right weapons that they need to defend this nation. Besides that, we're going to make sure that their health care is taken care of. We're increasing the budget for defense health care. And to make sure the families are taken care of. And again, for the second year in a row, we're giving a 2.6% pay increase to our troops. So that's just some of what's in the Defense Appropriations Act. While we're talking about appropriations, I'll move pretty quickly through a few things and get to your questions. Everyone's been frustrated, as I have been frustrated, about Washington not working, especially Congress. One of the problems is the way that we've been handling the budget and the spending. And so everyone is familiar with the term of omnibus and continuing resolutions. That is no way to run a government. Basically, we run up to a deadline and we do a temporary spending, and then we end up putting all the spending into one big package, and it's forced in at the end of the year to avoid a shutdown. Many of us have been pushing to change that, and last year, for the first time since Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, since 1994, the House passed all of the appropriations bills before the deadline. Unfortunately, the Senate didn't take it up. Right now, we're on track to actually complete the entire process before the September deadline. So the goal of the House is to get all of this done before August to get the Senate. The Senate has canceled their recess. They're going to be working on these. So we're not ramrodding these things through at the last minute, and that everyone has the ability to contribute to the process. So far, it's going well. We have passed out of the House several, and the Senate has already passed 3 of those. And so that's a record number for those in the Senate. Another bill that actually a bill that I've introduced just passed out of committee will be coming to the House floor very soon. And it has to do a lot with something we're familiar with in Georgia. And it's called the Build Act. And what this did was when Dodd-Frank was passed, it put a lot of onerous regulations on a lot of businesses, and including nonprofits, especially those in the mortgage business. Now, the way that Habitat for Humanity works is they actually, as they build homes for those that are in need of a dwelling, they actually originate a zero-interest mortgage. Now, when Dodd-Frank came out and pushed a lot of onerous regulations, the rule for loan originators ended up being nearly 2,000 pages long, and the reporting requirement was just unbelievably difficult. Now, nonprofits such as Habitat for Humanity, a lot of them don't have full-time employees. And so it really forced a lot of the Habitat for Humanity offices to have to close their doors because they didn't have the staff to actually meet the new onerous government requirements. So basically the Build Act, which we passed out of committee unanimously, actually it gives a reprieve to the nonprofits that are originating these types of mortgages. So it exempts them from the more onerous reporting requirements and regulations and puts them back on what the requirements were before Dodd-Frank passed. And so we should see that on the floor. So I'm sure people will begin to ask about some of these. We do have an immigration bill on the floor tomorrow. And before we get to questions, let me add one other aspect on it. As many of you are, I'm very concerned about the lack of civility in our nation today. Many of you are familiar with some of the things that have dominated the news. And as I have always done, I believe it's more important that we respect one another, respect their differing opinions. We can disagree, as some on this call are probably going to disagree with some of the policies that I have been supporting or I have been promoting. Some of you may be in agreement, but very few of us are ever going to agree on anything. But the important thing is we do handle these with civility and respect for one another. And so I have signed on to it, and about 120 of my colleagues, and I hope it's growing, have signed into a civility resolution in the House that we will go back to the days of statesmanship and will respect one another. We will show decency in our disagreement, and we will treat each other as respectful human beings. And I think if we could do that in our nation, we can make a whole lot of progress. A lot of other things we could discuss, the unbelievable success with the negotiations of North Korea, the way things are going there, foreign policy. A lot of things we could get to, but I tell you what, I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. So we'll go ahead and open up the phones for questions.
Congressman, thank you very much for that very informative update. Now, if you just recently joined the call and you have a question for the Congressman, please press *3 on your telephone now to enter the queue for questions. Again, that's *3 on your telephone. And we've got a question from Ann in Canton. Ann, you want to talk about the national debt?
Yeah, the national debt is more concerned for our future generations that there's going to be a national collapse if we can't get our debt down, and I want to know what's being done to reduce that debt.
That's a good question. I agree 100% with you, and this is one of the things that I've been working on from the first day I got into Congress. Our debt is now at about $21 trillion, and if you don't know how much that is, if you were to go back to the moment that Jesus was born, and you put $18,000 in the bank, and you deposited $18,000 in the bank every minute since Jesus was born, you still wouldn't be able to pay off the debt today. This is an incredibly large debt. We've never seen this level of debt in the history of our nation. Now, we have gone into debt in the past, and for the beginning of our nation, I mean, we were in debt when we won our independence, but we've always paid off the debts, and the debt that we have incurred, as our founders intended it to be, was only during times of national crisis and national emergency, such as our wars, World War I, World War II. We incurred debt during those times, natural disasters, but we quickly paid those debts off. What's driven us to the debt that we're in today was not spending for natural disasters, but things basically overspending on domestic programs and to artificially shore up the staggering economy in bailouts and TARP programs. So what has led us to is we have got to make significant cuts in spending. The only way I feel that we're going to be able to do that is to actually have a balanced budget requirement on Congress, because Congress has shown that it doesn't have the fortitude to actually take the necessary measures to cut the spending that we need to cut. Now, to get there, there's a lot of other things that we have to do. We have to reassess a lot of the government programs that we have. Which ones are needed? Which ones can we actually push back to the states, that the states run more efficiently? One of the things we're looking at right now, of course, healthcare is a big issue with what's happened with Obamacare, driving up premiums, making it unaffordable, and it's actually increased some of our debt. So one of the solutions we're looking for on that is to actually begin block granting all of the Medicaid funding back to the states. Now, when you do that and it fully puts the states in control of it, states will actually do a better job of handling that money than the federal government does, because they're closer to the people and there's less chance of fraud and waste and abuse. So one area is to do more with the money that we have. But the only way we're going to get out of it is to have a balanced budget amendment. I introduced one the first year I was here that required us to balance our budget within 10 years. And if you look at any budgeting that Congress does, we always do it on a 10-year window. And ever since I've been in Congress, every year we pass a budget that balances within 10 years. But the problem is, if we had stuck to that and we actually spent according to the budget and not going above the budget, the first year I've been here, we would have been 10 years away from a balanced budget. The next year, 9, the next year, 8, the next year, 7. But the problem is every year we have this sliding window if we budget to where it balances within 10 years. I think the days of until we actually get over this ultra partisanship that we're in right now, and we get back to focusing on what is right for the American people, not what is just right for our own political parties, that we're going to have a constitutional amendment to force that. The problem is the ultra partisanship right now. We had a balanced budget amendment, a weaker one than mine, come to the floor, and it just went straight on party line. Of course, you have to have a 2/3 vote to do that. The other thing that we're doing right now for it is actually improving the economy. As I said in the opening monologue, our revenues are up. And if we just continue to see this growth, even a moderate growth in the GDP, and we lock down our spending on domestic spending, we can reach a balanced budget within a short period of time. But that still doesn't address the debt. But we got to get to a surplus to start paying off that debt. So the key to be able to pay off the debt is actually cutting our spending and raising our revenue. It's the only way to get there. There's no other way of doing this. And it's something I agree with you. Even General Mattis said that is one of the greatest threats to the future of America is this growing debt that we have. And thank you for that question.
Congressman, thank you very much. And if anyone has just joined the call and has a question to ask of the Congressman, please press *3 on your telephone to enter the queue. Again, that's *3. And another feature of your phone this evening, if you would like to subscribe to our email updates, please press *6. Again, that's *6 on your phone will let you subscribe to our email updates. And now, if it's okay, Congressman, we have an online question from Jeff A. And Congressman, can you share the feeling around Washington re the derisive/toxic division between the parties?
Yeah, it is toxic at this point. And the problem that we're seeing right now is that party is becoming, in a lot of cases, and it's easier to say when you're in the majority and you're trying to get things done. But especially in the minority party at this point, that the divisiveness has become to the point that supporting party is more important than good policy. A good illustration was couple of months ago, we were on the floor debating a bill, and the Republican that was debating it stood up and said, I'm a bit surprised that my colleague on the other side of the aisle is actually opposing this bill, because this is the same bill word for word that the Democrats introduced 2 years ago that they were supporting. The only reason they were opposing it is because it was a Republican bill. And that's what we're seeing at this point. Look, we got an immigration bill that's coming to the floor tomorrow. This bill is likely not going to pass. There are aspects in this bill that in the past, if you go back and you look, even in just recent years past, even into the Obama administration, statements of Democrats stating this is what we need to do. We need to secure our border. We need to stop the trafficking of drugs. We need to stop the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the gang members coming across the border, and even terrorists that are coming across the border. This is the key. This was something that unified us, even in just recent years. But we're going to have a bill on the floor tomorrow, and I don't think a single Democrat is going to vote for it. In fact, even though we're providing a fix for the DACA recipients, which has been a priority for the Democrats, we're going to be securing the border. We're going to do some things all for in the past, but it is so divisive at this point. We've got to find somehow that we focus back on the American people and doing things for the American people, not just doing things to win an election or what hurts the other party. And quite frankly, the media is playing right into this as well, especially in the last week or two. I was really sickened by what I've seen, the reporting on some of the immigration issues that was, just to be frank with you, I started speaking out about the detention centers and the separating of children 3 years ago when I went to the border under the Obama administration. This was happening then. And I spoke out about the condition because at that time the administration had cut staff And so we had overcrowding of these detention centers, and these were people who had crossed the border illegally multiple times that were being held in these centers. And so they were separating the children, but even at that time, the conditions in these centers were so bad, it was actually a humanitarian effort to place the children with a family member while the rest of the family was waiting on their hearing. So they were placing with uncles or cousins or someone else to get them out of the detention center because, look, there's MS-13 gang members in these detention centers. But it was taking so long to get these adjudicated that there are overcrowded conditions, not enough staff maintaining it. I spoke out about it again then. In fact, the ACLU came out with a report back in May documenting a lot of these problems that even happened in the Obama administration, but we heard nothing. There was only crickets. But now the media comes out and again, I don't think we've got to find a way to keep these families together that want their kids together. Sometimes they want them placed with someone else to get them out of the detention center. But the way that this was built up, it became a crisis in the nation, and it was so one-sided that I think it causes to make decisions off emotions instead of what is best for the children. So it's not just the parties here. The media is playing into this, and I don't agree with everything that the president does. But if I do disagree with something the president does, I take it to him directly. We have a good relationship. We communicate that to him. But it seems like that it doesn't matter what this president does. Some in the media and some in the other party are just totally opposed to it, even if it's something that they supported in the past. I think the only way that we can get over this is to, as I was talking about civility, is to stand up and act like statesmen and show that our interest is in the American people first, not just party. So thank you for the question.
Congressman, we'll go back to the phones now. We have Steve S. in Woodstock. And Steve, you want to talk about the VA? You're on with the Congressman. Go ahead. Go ahead, Steve. Question about the VA?
Yeah, Congressman, who is going to be the one that choose who in the VA is to be fired? Because if you leave it to the VA, they're not going to fire anyone.
Yeah, and that's a good question because, and for others who may be on the call, what it's referring to is the Whistleblower and VA Accountability Act that we passed last Congress, which allows us to actually go in and fire some of the employees that basically did not have the heart, the service to the veteran in mind. In fact, I'm a veteran myself, and the way the law was written is basically going to be the secretary ultimately makes that decision. And so I can tell you with the secretary who's appointed by this president, he does want to see the VA cleaned up. The problem is when you get into, we don't know who the next president is or who their appointee is going to be, but I can tell you that one of the problems with the VA is it transformed from being an agency that was there to help the veteran into being just another government bureaucracy that was there to grow its own power and its own with its own self. It was an ultimate bureaucracy. It's going to take a while to get this thing fixed, and my heart goes out today. There was a veteran who was so upset with the VA. We see this all the time that. People are just frustrated with the VA, especially in Georgia with some of the health care they get. But anyhow, a guy tried to kill himself at in front of the state capitol today, a veteran who was just so distraught over the care he was getting. And so these are the types of things that continue to be a priority with the administration, with Congress. I met today with the chairman of our VA committee here on the next phase of reforms that we can do in the VA. And one thing that I've been actually talking to the White House about is how can we break this trend that we have been in of bureaucracy over service. And one of the ideas we're looking at is some call it public-private partnerships, but let's look at the idea of bringing in, allowing professional health care centers, existing hospitals provide service to veterans, either by building new hospitals for veterans or using existing hospitals. So you don't have to just go to Decatur to get health service or to a clinic in Rome. You can actually go to a local hospital that is run by another hospital that's basically contracting for the VA. So these are some of the things that we're working on helping our veterans and reforming the VA. Look, government reform is one of my priorities. It's been one of my priorities since I've been in public service. We can do better, and I believe that we're beginning to head in the right track. But when it comes to the VA, you're absolutely right, Steve, is the service is only going to be as good as the employees who are dedicated to do it, and we had to have a cultural change inside of VA, and that's why we passed the bill. And again, the answer is ultimately it's going to be the Secretary of the Veterans Administration with the direction of the President, Office of Management and Budget, and Office of Personnel Management makes a decision who are those that should not be working in the VA centers anymore.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And if you are on tonight's telephone town hall and have a question for the Congressman, please press *3 to enter the queue. And now we move to Roderick B. in Ackworth. Roderick, you want to talk about the handicapped and elderly with the Congressman. Go ahead.
Hey, Roderick.
Well, we might have lost Roderick. Sorry about that. We'll just move forward here, Congressman. Campbell H. in Ackworth. The Convention of States and what are we going to do to fix the budget is on your mind. Go ahead, Campbell. You are on with the Congressman.
Hello, Gary. Beth and I here want to dovetail into what you talked about earlier with the rolling 10-year budget, which keeps getting rolled forward 10 years every year. It appears that the only solution is going to be the people's solution through the Convention of States. I know that Georgia has passed the amendment on that. What can we do to help speed that up nationally, sir?
Well, I've always held that well, let me back up a little bit. What Campbell is talking about for those others on the phone is, Article 5 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to amend the Constitution. But it also, our founders were very, very wise in understanding that even if you centralize the power with Congress may not want to pass any amendments that actually restricts their power as a balanced budget amendment would. And so they actually included in the Constitution Article 5, which says that, this is how Congress amends the Constitution. But if Congress doesn't follow through and the will of the people is to amend the Constitution, that there is a procedure to do that. And that's what the Convention of States is. Now, it's never been fully enacted in the history of our nation, but I think at this point now is probably the time that it would be needed, which is if an appropriate number of states actually, their legislatures pass a resolution calling for a convention to amend the Constitution, not a constitutional convention. It doesn't call for a constitutional convention, but it calls for a convention of the legislators to amend the Constitution of the United States. Basically, it bypasses Congress because Congress is not doing what the will of the people are. Then that amendment follows the same process at that point. Then the amendment then goes to the states for ratification. It would still have to be ratified. And Campbell, I think you're right, because in the ultra partisanship we have here in Washington D.C., obviously we're not able to get to the fiscal responsibility that is needed to deal with the debt and deal with the deficit spending. I've always held that the closer we get to actually have the Convention of States would actually prompt Congress into acting. The problem we have right now is there's so many people up here that are disconnected from what's going on in the United States. I don't think they really see just how volatile this situation is. Some just believe you can still just print money and spend ourselves into oblivion, and they're tone deaf, and they just don't understand how upset the American people are on this. So I think the only way to really get grasp of this, and I think we're kind of heading in the right direction. As you said, Georgia has passed this. We're only, I think, 2 or 3 states away from forcing the Convention of States. And once that happens, we have to, one, make sure that when this convention comes in, that it only addresses the issue of what it's called for, which in this case would be a balanced budget amendment, that it doesn't go in and deal with Second Amendment or, change anything else on the Constitution, that it only focuses on an amendment to the Constitution based on what these states have said. And really, if we can just get this balanced budget amendment in, that would resolve a lot of the problems we're having.
Thank you, Congressman. Next on the line, we've got Galen B. from Ackworth. Let's talk about health care and the Affordable Care Act. Go ahead, Galen. You're live with the Congressman.
Thank you very much for taking my call and my question. And I just want, just briefly, real quick, I want to just read a quick scripture and then ask a question about the health care.
Sure.
You mentioned Jesus earlier. Proverbs 29:12 says, if a ruler hearken to lies, all his servants are wicked. Leviticus 19:11 say, you should not steal, neither deal falsely, neither lie to one another. So my question on healthcare is, we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about how it's raising up costs, but I know for a fact with the budget and legislation that Congress has passed, with the Republican Party being in the majority, has designed to gut and to cut the Affordable Care Act, thus raising the cost and the prices for the active citizen. And we need health care for everyone in this country who has worked to promote this country and to build it up. So my question to you is, why not commit to the American people, as I've heard you state, and instead of trying to gut the Affordable Care Act, which is doing a great job and many people have benefited from it, why not introduce legislation to promote it, to build it up, and those things that need fixing, why not fix it so that it can work for the American people and not against the American people? And that's my question. And lastly, I prayed for your soul, Congressman Loudermilk, because I've heard some things that you said that are just not true. So answer my question, and I'll sit back and listen.
Well, I appreciate that, Galen, and I always take the prayers because let me tell you, if you've heard something that you think I've said that wasn't true, then it's probably a misconception, because one thing that I will always do is tell the truth. And quite frankly, we just have a disagreement here. Obviously, you think that the extraordinary cost that we have right now because of the increase in health care is because of Republican policies. That's just, it isn't true. If you go back, look, I was a small businessman before I came to Congress when Obamacare passed, and the cost of health care got so high, I nearly shut down the business because I could not afford the premiums. I have friends that their premiums went from $400 a month for their health care to over $1,700 a month just for a family, and their deductible went from $2,000 to $10,000. Now this is when Democrats were still in control of Congress. So this is not something that Republicans have brought on. The idea is that the federal government should not be involved in this health insurance aspect. And it's the bureaucracy that's been put into this that has driven it. Look, basically, whenever the federal government takes over these things, let me share a quick story with you that'll illustrate this. In 1975, Victor Belenko, a Soviet Air Force pilot, defected to the United States. He had become distraught with the Soviet Union. He had basically, he would have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get in line to go to a grocery store, to the market, the government-run market, if he wanted to get any food. Because if you weren't there at 5 o'clock in the morning, by the time the store opened and you got in, all the government-provided food was gone. And so he took a chance and he defected to the United States. Of course, CIA brought him to rural Virginia, and he wrote this in his book called McPilot. I'm not making this up. One day he was the most wanted man by the KGB. They take him out to buy him a suit of clothes, and he sees a grocery store. And I'm making this much shorter than the story is. He said, look, I want to go in this grocery store because it'll tell me everything I need to know about whether the Soviet Union was right or America is right? Does this idea of capitalism, of free market work? He walked in the grocery store and he was amazed. He was so amazed by the fresh fruits and vegetables and the meats and all the selection that he actually thought that it was a ruse by the CIA, that not even the most wealthy in the Soviet Union, because of what the government was providing them, not even the most wealthy had that type of selection and that type of choice. Now, I want you to go in your grocery store and you look in the cereal aisle. There's 12 different types of Raisin Bran. I mean, we have an abundance in this nation. Why? Because that stuff is virtually free from government regulation, other than just the FDA and food quality. The government doesn't dictate how much Raisin Bran should be produced by a manufacturer or what they should put in it. Well, we have dozen types of Raisin Bran because they're all competing for each other, against each other for my business. It puts me in control of the decision making. They're all fighting to get me to purchase their box of Raisin Bran. They're all pretty much the same, raisins and bran flakes, but they differ a little bit in size and price, the packaging. But then somebody adds a little bit of granola in it and they sell a little bit better product. I mean, look at your iPhones and your smartphones. There's a new one coming out every few months. Why? Because they're competing for my business. Now, what happened with Obamacare is basically instead of letting insurance companies compete to get my business to sell me and my employees health insurance at the best rate, at the best quality they can get, the government under Obamacare took control of that entire industry and said, this is what you're going to provide, and dictated to it. And what we ended up was, just like in the Soviet Union with the grocery stores, is when the government provides every service or dictates every service, you no longer get quality, you no longer get affordability, and you end up paying more for less. That's exactly what has happened with our healthcare system. And so what I'm proposing is let's get back to put the patient in charge. Let's get back to actually allowing insurance companies to compete for the business of the individual. And that's what we're doing right now, is we're moving away from this centralized government control. And if you come up here and you will see some of what I call the ivory towers, the massive buildings here that the bureaucracy lives in, and you understand that sometimes as much as 50% or 50 cents on the dollar of your tax dollar goes to maintain a bureaucracy, and you're supposed to be happy about getting 50 cents back from that. I don't think that's right. I would much rather you be able to go out and shop for your own health care program, and we have ways of taking care of the needs of those who don't have health insurance. We're working on that. In fact, there was very little evidence of people not having health care, not having health insurance. That was the case. But through every program,
he's sitting there telling a bunch of bold lies because he doesn't want to admit that the ACA was working just like Mr. Galen told him
at some level. So all we're looking for is to make health care insurance affordable for everyone, because I actually know people who can't afford it anymore. And that's why we took away the individual mandate, is because some people look, I would just do better off by just paying cash to my doctor. Because one more illustration to illustrate the point. I visited a ear, nose, and throat specialist in Woodstock, Georgia, and we were talking about the impact of Obamacare, and he said, well, here, if somebody did not have health insurance and came into my office and needed a tonsillectomy, the whole tonsillectomy is $2,600. But if they have insurance, the cost is $5,800, because that cost is being dictated by the government through the health insurance company. Same procedure, but if you use insurance, it's $5,800. If you don't have insurance, it's $2,600. Now, the problem with that is when my friend goes to that ear, nose, and throat specialist to have a tonsillectomy and has insurance, Obamacare law says he cannot pay cash even if he wants to. So if he's got a $10,000 deductible, guess what? He's paying out $5,800 out of his pocket. And this is a working American, to where if he didn't have insurance, he could actually just pay the $2,600 and walk away. This is what's wrong with the system. If you go back and you remember, you were promised that everyone was going to save $2,500 a year on their health insurance. That didn't happen. It was, and I can tell you it's because whenever the government gets in control, and whenever the bureaucrats get in involved in the situation, quality goes down, the cost goes up, and you end up standing in line for what the government says you have to offer. And look, I appreciate you in your prayers. I always seek God's guidance in everything we do. And look, it is our responsibility to do what is right and best for all Americans, and that's what we're trying to do here.
As a quick reminder, if you would like to subscribe to email updates from the Congressman's office,
You know, Mr. Loudermilk, in this case, you can tell that what he was saying was nowhere near the truth. Most Americans who entered the ACA love the ACA. When states set up their own markets, the competition is brought in through the states. When we sit there and sabotage by taking away the mandates, taking away the subsidies that we promised to give for those seeking insurance, that's when we started having problems with the deductibles going up, with the premiums going up. And these are all things that were brought on because they did not want the ACA to succeed under Obama. And they continue to try to gut it. And that's the same question that Mr. Galen asked when he first got on the line.
I'm not clear what's going on with it. Please help me understand.
Well, and I appreciate that because I can understand that as well. And you've been paying into this since I was 16 years old and got my first job carrying 2x4s on a construction project. And so, look, Social Security is on a path of failure. It's several years down the road, but we do have to make changes now to ensure that those who invested in it, like you're going to get your investment back. But I doubt I'm going to get my investment back in it, the full investment, by the time I retire. And definitely, my son will never see his unless we change the path we're on. Now, first of all, you're entitled to everything that you put into that, and we can make changes without affecting this generation, your generation, my generation, but just change the way that we move forward to make sure everyone actually gets what they've invested into it. Now, let me address something that I've actually got some emails on today. There's a false news report out there saying that Republicans voted to strip the $2.9 billion surplus from Social Security by passing the balanced budget. That is an entirely false news report. Some may have seen that out there. One thing to understand is the Social Security and Medicare are in a totally separate funded budget. It's called the mandatory budget. Whenever we're talking about budgets and spending up here, we're talking about what's called the discretionary budget. Those are things such as defense and transportation and federal aviation and NASA and all these different bureaucracies that are run through the federal government. Things such as Medicare and Social Security are into a totally separate budget area called mandatory, and they're automatically triggered. Their spending is automatically triggered. And even though I think there needs to be some changes in that, whenever we talk about these balanced budget amendments, those are dealing with the actual discretionary side. They don't affect the Social Security side at all. But because we're looking at a time when we have baby boomer generation moving in, and more people are moving into retirement age, more so than there are people contributing into Social Security. We have to look at adjusting that going forward. And some of the things that we're looking to do for future generations, not for yours, not necessarily for mine, is giving the option to give people a little more control over their retirement investments. So there's several programs, I should say proposals out there of how to address this in the future, but the president has been absolutely clear that he does not want to address this at this point. So you can be comforted that nothing is going to be coming in the short term. Possibly next year we'll look at some things, but none of the proposals that we have proposed, Republicans have proposed at all, would affect your ability to draw what you've invested into Social Security or Medicare or anybody that is nearing retirement. This would only be dealing with those next generations coming up following yours and mine.
Thank you very much. I think it was key that he told us what those proposals were. he simply avoided the question and would not answer what changes we're looking at to make, because one of the things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to change the amount that's eligible to be taken out for Social Security. We're going to have to make sure that full benefits are paid throughout. And if we don't make those decisions soon, we're just making it worse for the future generations.
I must say that I have been very disappointed in the Republican Party in general in their lack of support of our president. I'm wondering if you're seeing any changes in that. I would like to see a little more support of our president from the Republican Party.
Well, I appreciate that, Virginia. And let me tell you this from my perspective, being up here. I'm hearing that when I go back home. And a lot of that is a result of the media. Look, clearly there's two branches of government. There are three branches, but in this case, too, you have the executive branch, which is the president, and the legislative branch. And they are to be separate. And there will be times that, you know, I don't fully agree with the president on the trade issues. I'm more of a free trade guy, but I do understand that the president is using a lot of the trade tariffs that he's putting in as a negotiating tool. And so when I do have a disagreement with the direction the White House is going, I take it directly to the White House. I don't take it to the media. But anytime that there is, you know, a Republican that may disagree in public with the president, that is immediately taken to the press and taken to the people. I can tell you that there is a close cooperation between the White House and the House of Representatives. Speaker Paul Ryan, regardless of what people think about him, he has a very close relationship with the president. They talk multiple times daily. There is a lot of coordination going on. The same thing with the majority leader, Kevin McCarthy, and rank and file members. I talk to my colleagues all the time that have been on the phone with the president. I've been to the White House multiple times. I deal mostly with his budget people. Mick Mulvaney and I are very close. But I can tell you, when it comes to the agenda, the president's agenda, the majority of the Republicans here are very supportive of his agenda, because basically he's adopting the agenda that we laid out back last year. And so there is a tremendous amount of support. Just understand this, that there are personality differences between people. There are folks here that their personality, they don't necessarily care for the president himself, but they really do like his policies. And then there are those that, you know, are just they're very vocal and on board, but for the most part, in fact, I'll share this statistic with you that was a poll that just came out that showed that a record number of Republicans, 92% of Republicans support the president and his agenda. That is a record number. I don't know that we had that during Ronald Reagan's time. And I think you're going to see that within members of Congress as well. And even there's been a transformation a lot going on up here. There were a lot of people that are very critical of the president early on. But you know, you don't hear a lot of people just coming out and beating the drum for the president, and part of that is simply because of keeping the separation of powers. But what you are seeing is a lot of president's agenda getting the top priority and moving forward. But I appreciate that question, because I get it all the time back home.
No, that was a pretty good question, because what I see is the president trying to bully the members of Congress. And Congress needs to understand that they're there to stand up and provide up checks and balances for what the president is trying to do, to make sure that he doesn't violate the Constitution. And right now, we're seeing a lot of that going on.
And there's been so much back and forth about the Democrats that are so concerned about the illegal children being dropped off in this country. And I'm wondering, can the Border Patrol determine if these children are being brought into this country by their parents, or are they brought in by smugglers?
Well, and I appreciate that question, because that is something that the media has not been reporting about what's really going on at the border. Look, 10,000, there's currently 12,000 children that have been put in Health and Human Services custody, for lack of a better term, or oversight. 10,000 of those were unaccompanied minors that showed up to the border without parents. So you're not hearing that 10,000, that leaves about 12,000 in HHS custody. Some of those children, the parents request because they don't want them kept in the detention centers, and they go with other family members. Some are because the courts have ruled they can only stay with their family for 20 days. And so the courts have actually forced that those be placed in foster care. In fact, I met with a gentleman that if I gave you his name, you would all know who he is if you watch Fox News. He's actually on the board of one of these homes here in Virginia that takes in a lot of these children, and the conditions there are far better than what's in the detention center. Now, that's no excuse for separating families, but especially those that want to stay together with the children. And as I said earlier on, I've been vocal about this for 3 years when many of my Democrat opponents remained silent because their president was in charge at the time. So to get to your question here, one of the challenges that we're facing, because we know that there's a rash of human trafficking, even sex trafficking, that is coming across the border. That is a huge problem we have, and part of the challenge our Border Patrol agents and I have is determining, are these actually the parents of the children? Because some are coming in without documentation, and that even a document showing that this child is actually the child of the man that brought him across the border. And so in the interest of the child, sometimes Border Patrol has to make that determination. If there is a question about whether that is actually the father or is that a sex trafficker that has brought them across with the intention of selling them and has just threatened the child, which happens. I'm not making this stuff up. This stuff really happens. These are the types of decisions that the Border Patrol has to make, or the ICE agents have to make. And I can promise you this: every decision that they make, as hard as it is actually in the best interest of the health and the welfare of that child. And so these are some of the things that haven't been told in the media, but have just created a fury among people with the idea that the government is purposely separating children from their families. Look, most of our Border Patrol agents are family members themselves. They appreciate this. One thing about this country, I don't care who's the president or who's in control of the country, we're a good country at heart. And when people start making these accusations, it infuriates me, because we are a good country. We do think in the best interest of the people. And when we take these political differences and we turn them into accusations that divide our country down the middle, it is not healthy for anyone. And so, right now we're keeping families together after the president passed an executive order to keep the families together. But after 20 days, unless we make some significant changes, the courts have ruled that children have to be separated. So the option is just to let the entire family into the United States, which is what's been happening. And again, let me reemphasize, the only families that are being detained are the families that this is not their first time illegally crossing the border. This is their second or third or subsequent time crossing the border. The first time they cross the border, they're simply sent back. This is multiple offenses of illegally crossing the border. And so, the previous administration would do what's called catch and release and just allow the families to go ahead and enter the United States with the promise of coming back for a court date, and then they never show up. And so this administration said, look, we've got to enforce the laws that are on the book. That is our role. And so the detention centers were put up to keep them there until they had a court hearing to simply deport them. But the problem is there are so many that are flooding in our porous borders is that they're filling up the detention centers, and the judges can't hear the cases fast enough. So the answer is we need to have more border security. That's the first and foremost aspect, is we have to secure our borders. That would take care of the majority of the problem we have. But
listening to this, he is really skirting the issue First of all,
But again, I think
the people that we have at the border right now were a migrant caravan coming in from the Latin American countries. We knew full well that they were coming. We didn't prepare for them. We didn't accommodate for them. We just decided that we were going to have a zero tolerance policy, which put these people in custody and separated them from them children. Everyone that's coming across the border from that migrant caravan has been separated. Not just the first timers. There were no second or third timers, but they were all first timers coming here to seek asylum for different reasons. Attorney General Jeff Sessions narrowed the reasons that they could seek asylum. That's what's caused this current issue. That's what's caused the current crisis. Now, these homes that these children are being put in for foster care and everything, I want you to take a look at the books. Take a look at who owns these homes, who is profiting from these homes. These people are getting paid quite a sum of money to be able to foster these children. And this is really, you know, I hate to say this, but they're friends of Mr. President Trump. They're friends of his that are profiting from this crisis. The issue as far as him signing an executive order to reverse his own policy has been welcome and coming, but it still has not been made the situation where it's supposed to be.
Hey.
Hey.
Are you sure it's Jane and not Diane? I called about my husband.
On the Veterans Choice topic, please.
Right. I called on that.
Okay. Hey, is it Diane?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Hey, Diane. Sorry about that.
How you doing, Congressman?
I'm doing pretty well. I hope you're doing well.
I know you've got a lot on your hands. But my question was, my husband is a disabled veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And the closest clinic is one clinic. But
Right.
they can't do anything there. He got hurt last week. I carried him there. And they told me to take him to the emergency room that he had to have stitches, the nearest emergency room, they said. But we're not going to guarantee it's going to get paid.
Right.
I said, well, what are you talking about? Well, it's got to have stitches. You got to take him to the nearest emergency room. So then I called Choice, and Choice said there's nothing that is going to change with the Choice program with the bills that have been signed. Everything is going to be the same. So right now, I still don't know if that hospital bill is going to be paid.
Right. And that's one of the things we've been trying to work on some expansion to the Choice program, and all of these are Band-Aid fixes, and I hate to say that, but we've got to have an overhaul of the entire veterans healthcare system, because it is, you got some on the Veterans Choice program, and I'm a veteran, but I don't use the veterans health benefits. I pay for my own health insurance for my family. My dad did before he passed away, so I dealt a lot with him. But one of my staff members is a retired Vietnam veteran who uses Choice, and he keeps me up to date with the challenges he has on Choice. And he's having to change pharmacies all the time because one pharmacy quits covering Choice, and they'll quit covering a type of drug that he has to have. We've got to have an overhaul, and so if what I'd like for you to do is at the end of this call, they're going to give out our contact information for our local office. I'd like to talk to you more about this, because I'm trying to engage more with the veterans community that are using this. So as I mentioned earlier, I was talking with our veterans committee chairman about some of the challenges we're facing and the direction we're going. We're trying to get a good look at, because this is a priority of the president, is what is an overall direction that we can take healthcare for veterans that is a fix for the entire system, instead of just putting Band-Aids on this. And so, if you don't mind, keep a pen and paper handy, and when they make that announcement now, but they're going to announce it at the end, how to get in touch. Well, in fact, I'll give you the phone number: 770-429-1776. 770-429-1776. And when you call in, just tell them we talked on the phone or the telephone town hall, and I ask you to call in so we can link up together. I'd like for you to talk to the folks in our office here about the challenges you're having. First of all, we may be able to help you with that. with getting that paid. And let me say this while I've got everybody on the phone. One of the things that we do, and one of the top priorities of our office is to helping those who are having issues with these bureaucracies and with the federal government. And if you're having an issue with the VA, if you're having an issue with the IRS, if you're having an issue with one of the other many 3 or 4 letter agencies and bureaucracies we have, we're there to help, and I encourage you to reach out if you are having an issue. A lot of times that we can help resolve that. So we'll try to resolve the issue with you this way, but more importantly, I want to talk to you about the challenges you're facing and take these stories to try to come up with a resolution. And I think that, to me, that's the best way of fixing things is from the bottom up, not the top down.
Great, Congressman. We're going to go to another call. We've got Gerald D. talking about immigration reform. Go ahead, Gerald. You're live with the Congressman.
Well, thank you. Congressman, I support what you're doing. My question is, what's in the immigration bill that may come up for a vote tomorrow? And when will we get a real immigration bill that doesn't include amnesty and open borders? By the way, I heard a good story that Belenko told that maybe I can tell you sometime.
Okay, sounds good. Well, let me tell you, I spent all weekend reading over the new immigration bill, and it's very difficult. There's a reason why you don't get immigration reform but about every 40 years here, and because there are so many emotions involved in this, it's really hard to get the numbers that you need to get something done. The immigration bill tomorrow is not that far off. In fact, I think it's something that I think many are going to be able to support. The first and foremost aspect is securing the border. Reagan got caught up on this amnesty promise, which will secure the border, to give amnesty for all these folks who are in here. What happened is got amnesty, and then no one ever secured the border. The bill that's coming up tomorrow actually front loads the $25 billion to.
Well, let me go over when he talked about the Veterans Choice Program. The Veterans Choice Program is a VA program that if you're getting medical care through the VA and they can't provide you for your needs, they give you what they call a choice voucher. That voucher allows you to go find a doctor that can treat you and take care of you. That doesn't work with the emergency room, okay? It sounded the age of the gentleman, he was probably over 65, 67 years old. He should have had Medicare or Medicaid options, which would have paid for his emergency room visit. The other thing about the about the VA, if you qualify for prescriptions through the VA, those can be mail ordered, sent to you at almost no cost. So to think that his employee had to change pharmacies to get their medication, that's just simply not true. One of the things that this current administration has done, it has taken away some of the safeguards for prescriptions as they're concerning veterans. And veterans now have to pay even more money for their prescriptions. Veterans have to pay even more money for their insurance through the VA, through the Veterans Administration, or through TRICARE. Those things are reality for most veterans. The veterans who use the VA usually only use it for specific things, military related. So something like an emergency, a fall that required an emergency room visit because of stitches, that's not normally something the Veterans Administration covers. And that's why he was told to go to the local emergency room where the clinic would not perform that for him. So it's a lot of things going on here. You've listened to Mr. Loudermilk and you've heard a lot of things. I want you to research everything, every question that he gave you an answer to. See the facts for yourself. Don't just listen to what he had to say. Because the one thing overriding that I see is it's a lot of fluff in the things that he said. Barely ever did he actually directly answer the questions that he was asked. He skirted the questions by providing stories. He took the time to just use his voice, not to tell you what was going on, but just to tell you stories to take your mind off of what was going on. There's a lot of things going up in Washington, a lot of disagreement between the parties, a lot of disagreements with what the president is doing. The only way we can fix those things is that we have to put people in place who are going to work for you, not against you. That means party loyalty goes away. The loyalty goes to the people who are my constituents. Those people who, each time I vote, it's going to be with you in mind to make sure we advance your interests. If you look at Mr. Loudermilk's record, you're going to see that that's not the case. He wants to say that there's civility between the partisan groups. Look at his record. Look at it. Look at every vote he has ever made. I guarantee you less than 1% will show that he has voted in your interest when the other party has proposed legislation. Do that for me. You'll see that I'm the candidate that you need in Washington. You'll see that I'm the one who's going to go to Washington and only be your voice, not the voice of the Democratic Party, but the voice of my constituents in the 11th Congressional District. I thank you for taking this time to listen in on Mr. Loudermilk's town hall. It shows me that you want to be informed, that you want to know what's going on. And that's the type of people that we need in our district, showing that you care about what's going on in your life, what's going on in your district, what's going on in your country. And I thank you for that. Once again, my name is Flynn Broady, and I want to be your next congressman for the 11th Congressional District.